Chapter 4, Tissues and Membranes. In our city of cells, that is, human body, the similar cells work together and have the same function. A group of cells with similar structure and function is called a tissue. Think for a moment of a hospital and its group of workers, nurses, aides, lab techs, cooks, janitors, doctors, and many others. If each nurse equals a cell, then all the nurses in the hospital could be considered a tissue, as could all the aides and all the cooks and so on. Each tissue will contribute to the proper functioning of the hospital. What then would the hospital be, right? The hospital would be an organ, a cooperation of tissues. Recall from chapter 1 that there are 4 major groups of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve tissue. An organ may, and usually does, contain tissues from all 4 groups. This chapter presents more detailed descriptions of the tissues in these 4 categories. You will notice that the function of a tissue is most often a description of what the tissue contributes to the functioning of an organ of which it is a part. Also in this chapter is a discussion of membranes, which are sheets of tissues. Some of these were mentioned in chapter 1 with the body cavities. As you might expect, each type of membrane has its specific location and function. Epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissues are found on surfaces as either coverings, outer surfaces in parentheses, close parentheses, or linings, inner surfaces in parentheses, close parentheses. Because they have no capillaries on their own, epithelial tissues receive oxygen and nutrients from the blood supply of the connective tissue beneath them. Many epithelial tissues are capable of secretion and may be called glandular epithelium, or more simply, glands. Classification of epithelial tissues is based on the type of cell of which the tissue is made, the characteristic shape of the cell, and the number of layers of cells. There are 3 distinctive shapes. Squamous cells are flat, cuboidal cells are cube-shaped, and columnar cells are tall and narrow. Simple is the term for a single layer of cells, and stratified means that many layers of cells are present. Simple squamous epithelium. Simple squamous epithelium is a single layer of flat cells. These cells are very thin and very smooth. These are very important physical characteristics. The alveoli, air sacs, of the lungs are simple squamous epithelium. The thinness of the cells permits the diffusion of gases between the air and blood. Another location of this tissue is capillaries, the smallest blood vessels. Capillary walls are only 1 cell thick, which permits the exchange of gases, nutrients, and waste products between the blood and the tissue fluid. The interior surface of capillaries is also very smooth, in parentheses, and these cells continue as the lining of the arteries, veins, and heart, close parentheses. This is very important because the smooth surface prevents abnormal blood clotting within blood vessels. Stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified squamous epithelium consists of many layers of mostly flat cells, although lower cells are rounded. In the lowest layer, mitosis takes place to continually produce new cells to produce these worn off the surface. This type of epithelium makes up the epidermis of the skin, where it is called keratinizing because the protein keratin is produced. The surface cells are dead. Stratified squamous epithelium of the non-keratinizing type lines the oral cavity, the esophagus, and in women, the vagina. In these locations, the surface cells are living and make up the mucous membranes of these organs. In all of its body locations, this tissue is a barrier to microorganisms because the cells of which it is made are very close together. The more specialized functions of the epidermis will be covered in the next chapter. Transitional epithelium. Transitional epithelium is a type of stratified epithelium in which the surface cells change shape from round to squamous. The urinary bladder is lined with transitional epithelium. When the bladder is empty, the surface cells are rounded. As the bladder fills, these cells become flattened. Transitional epithelium enables the bladder to fill and stretch without tearing the lining. Simple cuboidal epithelium. Simple cuboidal epithelium is a single layer of cube-shaped cells. This type of tissue makes up the functional units of the thyroid gland and salivary glands. These are examples of glandular epithelium. Their function is secretion. In these glands, the cuboidal cells are arranged in a small sphere and secrete into the cavity formed by the sphere. In the thyroid gland, the cuboidal epithelium secretes the thyroid hormones. Thyroxine is an example. In the salivary glands, the cuboidal cells secrete saliva. Cuboidal epithelium also makes up portions of the kidney tubules. Here, the cells have microvilli, and their function is the reabsorption of useful materials back to the blood. Columnar cells are taller than they are wide and are specialized for secretion and absorption. The stomach lining is made of columnar epithelium that secretes gastric juice for digestion. The lining of the small intestine secretes digestive enzymes, but these cells also absorb the end products of digestion from the cavity of the intestine into the blood and lymph. To absorb efficiently, the columnar cells of the small intestine also have microvilli, which you may recall are folds of the cell membrane on their free surfaces. These microscopic folds greatly increase the surface area of absorption. In parentheses, true for the cuboidal kidney tubule cells as well, close parentheses. Yet, another type of columnar cell is the goblet cell, which is a unicellular gland. Goblet cells secrete mucus and are found in the lining of the intestine and the lining of parts of the respiratory tract, such as the trachea. Mucous membranes will be described in a later section. Ciliated epithelium. Ciliated epithelium consists of columnar cells that have swaths, in parentheses, wheat fields, close parentheses, of motile cilia on their free surfaces. Recall from chapter 3 that the function of these motile cilia is to sweep materials across the cell surface. Ciliated epithelium lines the nasal cavities, larynx, trachea, and large bronchial tubes. The cilia sweep mucus, including trapped dust and bacteria from inhaled air, toward the pharynx to be swallowed. Bacteria are then destroyed by the hydrochloric acid in the stomach. The air that reaches the lungs is almost entirely free of pathogens and particulate pollution. Another location of ciliated epithelium in women is the lining of the fallopian tubes. The cilia here sweep the ovum, which has no means of self-locomotion, toward the uterus. The epithelial tissues are summarized in Table 4.1. Note, this table is a concise summary of what you have read in preceding section. Glands. Glands are cells or organs that secrete something. That is, they produce a substance that has a function either at the site or at a more distant site. Unicellular glands. Unicellular glands means one cell. Goblet cells are example of unicellular glands. As mentioned earlier, goblet cells are found in the lining of the respiratory and digestive tracts. Their secretion is mucus. Multicellular glands. Most glands are made of many similar cells of a variety of cells with their secretions mingled into a collective secretion. Again, most glands are made of many similar cells or of a variety of cells with their secretions mingled into a collective secretion. Multicellular glands may be divided into two major groups: exocrine glands and endocrine glands. Exocrine glands have ducts, tubes, to take the secretion away from the gland to the site of its function. Salivary glands, for example, secrete saliva that is carried by ducts to the oral cavity. Sweat glands secrete sweat that is transported by ducts to the skin surface, where the sweat can be evaporated by excess body heat. The gastric glands of the stomach lining contains different kinds of cells, which produce hydrochloric acid and the enzyme pepsin. Both of these secretions are part of gastric juice. Endocrine glands and ductless glands. The endocrine glands are ductless glands. The secretions of endocrine glands are a group of chemicals called hormones, which enter capillaries and are circulated throughout the body. Hormones then bring about specific effects in their target organs. These effects include aspects of growth, use of minerals and other nutrients, and regulation of blood pressure, and they will be covered in more detail in Chapter 10. Examples of endocrine glands are the thyroid gland, the adrenal gland, and the pituitary gland. The pancreas is an organ that is both an exocrine and an endocrine gland. The exocrine portions secrete digestive enzymes that are carried by ducts to the duodenum of the small intestine, their site of action. The endocrine portions of the pancreas, called pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans, secrete the hormones insulin and glycogen directly into the blood. Connective tissue. There are several kinds of connective tissue, some of which may at first seem more different than alike. The types of connective tissue include areolar, adipose, fibrous, the elastic tissue, as well as blood, bone, and cartilage. These are summarized in Table 4.2. A characteristic that all connective tissues have in common is the presence of a matrix in addition to the cells. The matrix is a structural network or solution of non-living intercellular material. Each connective tissue has its own specific kind of matrix. The matrix of blood, for example, is blood plasma, which is mostly water. The matrix of bone is made primarily of calcium, salts, which are then hard and strong. As each type of connective tissue is described in the following sections, mentions will be made of the type of cells present, as well as the kind of matrix. Blood. Although blood is the subject of Chapter 11, a brief description will be given here. Blood consists of cells and plasma cells. Cells are the living portion. The matrix of blood is plasma, which is about 52% to 62% of the total blood volume in the body. The water of plasma contains dissolved salts, nutrients, gases, and waste products. As you might expect, one of the primary functions of plasma is transport of these materials within the body. Blood cells are produced from stem cells in the red bone marrow. The body's primary hemopoietic tissue, in parentheses, blood forming tissues, close parentheses, which is found in flat and irregular bones such as the hip bone and vertebrae. The blood cells are red blood cells, platelets, and the 5 kinds of white blood cells: neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, and lymphocytes. Lymphocytes mature and divide in lymphatic tissue, which makes up the spleen, the lymph nodes, and the thymus gland. The thymus also contains stem cells, but they produce only lymphocytes. Stem cells are present in the spleen and lymph nodes as well. Though the number of lymphocytes they produce is a small fraction of the total. The blood cells make up 38% to 48% of the total blood, and each type of cell has a specific function. Red blood cells, RBCs, carry oxygen bonded to the iron in their hemoglobin. White blood cells destroy pathogens by phagocytosis, the production of antibodies or other chemical methods, and provide us with immunity to some diseases. Platelets prevent blood loss. The process of blood clotting involves platelets. Areolar connective tissue. The cells of areolar or loose connective tissue are called fibroblasts. A blast cell is a producing cell, and fibroblasts produce protein fibers. The most abundant fibers are collagen and elastin. Collagen fibers are very strong. Elastin fibers are elastic. That is, they are able to return to their original length or recoil after being stretched. Fibroblasts are able to migrate to sites of damage and produce these protein fibers as part of the repair process. Collagen, elastin, and tissue fluid make up the matrix or non-living portion of areolar connective tissue. Also within the matrix are mast cells that release inflammatory chemicals when tissue is damaged, and many white blood cells, which are capable of self-locomotion. Their importance here is related to the location of areolar connective tissue. Areolar tissue is found beneath the dermis of the skin and beneath the epithelial tissue of all the body systems that have openings to the environment. Recall that one function of white blood cells is to destroy pathogens. How do pathogens enter the body? Many do so through breaks in the skin. Bacteria and viruses also enter with the air we breathe and the food we eat, and some may get through the epithelial lining of the respiratory and digestive tracts and cause tissue damage. Areolar connective tissue with its mast cells and many white blood cells is strategically placed to intercept pathogens before they get to the blood and circulate throughout the body. Adipose tissue. Humans have two major kinds of adipose tissue. The more familiar and more abundant kind is white adipose tissue, which we will call adipose tissue or white fat. The less familiar and less abundant kind is brown adipose tissue, which we will call brown fat. The cells of both kinds are called adipocytes. The adipocytes of adipose tissue are specialized to store fat in microscopic droplets, and the true fats are the chemical form of long-term energy storage. Excess nutrients have calories that are not wasted but are converted to fat to be stored for use when food intake decreases. Any form of excess calories, whether in fats, carbohydrates, or amino acids from protein, may be changed to triglycerides and stored. The amount of matrix in adipose tissue is small and consists of tissue fluid and a few collagen fibers. Most fat is stored subcutaneously in the areolar connective tissue between the dermis and muscles. This layer varies in thickness among individuals. The more excess calories consumed and stored, the thicker the layer. Adipocytes can be replaced by mitosis, and the body's number of adipocytes is believed to remain relatively constant throughout the lifespan of individuals. Each adipocyte, however, may change in size, becoming larger if there is more fat to be stored or smaller if the fat is used to supply cellular energy. As mentioned in Chapter 2, adipose tissue also cushions organs such as the eyes and kidneys. Adipose tissue is also considered an endocrine tissue because it produces at least one hormone. Leptin is an appetite-suppressing hormone secreted by adipocytes to signal the hypothalamus in the brain that fat storage is sufficient. When leptin secretion diminishes, appetite increases. Leptin also stimulates the formation of bone matrix by cells called osteoblasts and has other effects on bone tissue. Adipocytes secrete at least two chemicals that help regulate the use of insulin and glucose in fat metabolism. Adipose tissue is also involved in inflammation. The body's first response to injury in that it produces cytokines, chemicals that activate white blood cells. Our adipose tissue is not simply an inert depository of fat. Rather, it is a part of the complex system that ensure we are nourished properly and that protect us from pathogens that get through the skin. Brown fat is found in abundance in infants and to a lesser extent in adults. Unlike white adipose tissue, Brown fat is not an energy storage tissue. It is instead a thermogenic, in parentheses, heat generating, close parentheses, tissue in which the cells rapidly break down glucose or fat in cell respiration. In these cells, however, the decomposition of glucose is uncoupled from the synthesis of ATP, and most of the energy is released as heat. When do we need more heat? When we are chilled by a cooled environment. One automatic response to external cold is that we shiver. The shivering reflex in infants is not efficient, and a chill to the body stimulates the mitochondria and brown fat to become very active. As an infant gets older, shivering becomes more effective, and the amount of brown fat diminishes. In adults, brown fat may be found in the neck and shoulder areas and along the backbone. Lean adults seem to have more brown fat than do those who are overweight, and the amount in human adults does not seem to be a constant. It is still a heat-generating tissue, however, and may contribute to a person's ability to maintain a normal body weight. Regular exercise or exposure to cold stimulates muscle cells to release the hormone irisin, which transform white adipocytes to brown adipocytes, or the more recently discovered not quite brown adipocytes that have been named beige fat cells. These intermediate cells are believed to switch fairly easily from storing fat to burning fat, heat production. The heart also secretes hormones, the natriuretic peptides, that promote the conversion of white fat cells to beige or brown fat cells. The heart also secretes hormones, the natriuretic peptides, that promote the conversion of white fat cells to beige or brown fat cells. Both beige and brown fat cells use up more energy nutrients, in parentheses, not storing them as triglycerides, close parentheses, thereby using more calories and producing heat. You may be wondering what gives brown and beige fat cells their color. The numerous mitochondria contain iron, which colors the fat tissue a reddish brown, the same way it colors muscle tissue. Fibrous connective tissue. Fibrous connective tissue consists mainly of parallel, regular, collagen fibers with a few fibroblasts scattered among them. This parallel arrangement of collagen provides great strength yet is flexible. The location of this tissue are related to the need for flexible strength. The outer walls of arteries are reinforced with fibrous connective tissue because the blood in these vessels is under high pressure. The strong outer wall prevents rupture of the artery. Tendons and ligaments are made of fibrous connective tissue. Tendons connect muscle to bones. Ligaments connect bones to bones. When the skeleton is moved, these structures must be able to withstand the great mechanical forces exerted on them. Fibrous connective tissue has a relatively poor blood supply, which makes repair a slow process. If you have ever had a severely sprained ankle, which means the ligaments have been overstretched, you know that complete healing may take several months. An irregular type of fibrous connective tissue forms the dermis of the skin and the fasciae, which is membranes, around muscles. Although the collagen fibers here are not parallel to one another, in parentheses, instead they crisscross at many angles, close parentheses, the tissue is still strong. The dermis is different from other fibrous connective tissues in that it has a good blood supply. Elastic connective tissue. As its name tells us, elastic connective tissue is made primarily of elastin fibers. Also important are stabilizing fibers of the protein fibrillin. One of the locations of this tissue is the walls of large arteries such as the aorta, in parentheses, which emerges from the left ventricle of the heart, close parentheses, and its branches. These vessels are stretched when the heart contracts and pumps blood. and then they recoil or snap back when the heart relaxes. This recoil helps keep the blood moving away from the heart and is important to maintain normal blood pressure. Elastic connective tissue is also found surrounding the alveoli of the lung. The elastic fibers are stretched during inhalation and then recoil during exhalation to squeeze air out of the lungs. If you pay attention to your breathing for a few months, you will notice the inhalation is an active process, but normal exhalation is a passive process in that it does not require work or energy. This is because of the normal elasticity of the lungs. Bone. The prefix that designate bone is osteo. So bone cells are called osteocytes. The matrix of bone is made of calcium, salts, and collagen and is strong, hard, and not flexible. In the shafts of long bones, such as the femur, the osteocyte matrix and blood vessels are in very precise arrangements called Harversian systems or osteons. Bone has a good blood supply, which enables it to serve as a storage site for calcium and to repair itself relatively rapidly after a simple fracture. Some bones, such as the sternum, which is the breastbone, close parentheses, and pelvic bone, contain red bone marrow, the primary homeopoietic tissue that produces blood cells. Other functions of bone tissue are related to the strength of bone matrix. The skeleton supports the body, and some bones protect internal organs from mechanical injury. A more complete discussion of bone is found in Chapter 6. Cartilage. The protein carbohydrate matrix of cartilage does not contain calcium salts, and it also differs from that of bone in that it contains more water, which makes it resilient. It is firm yet smooth and flexible. Cartilage is found on the joint surfaces of bones, where it is smooth surface helps prevent friction. The tip of the nose and the external ear are supported by flexible cartilage. The wall of the trachea, the airways of the lungs, and contains firm rings of cartilage to maintain an open passageway for air ducts. Discs of cartilage are found between the vertebrae of the spine. Here, the cartilage is a firm cushion. It absorbs shock and permits movement. Within the cartilage matrix are the chondrocytes, or cartilage cells. There are no capillaries within the cartilage matrix, so these cells are nourished by diffusion through the matrix, a slow process. This becomes clinically important when cartilage is damaged because repair will take place very slowly or not at all. Athletes sometimes damage cartilage within the knee joint. Such damaged cartilage is usually surgically removed in order to preserve as much joint mobility as possible. Takeaway 1. Which connective tissues are part of the skeletal system and how? 2. Blood tissue that has transport functions. Name 2 parts of blood tissue that transport something, and for each, state what. 3. Which connective tissues have storage functions and what do they store? Muscle tissues. Muscle tissue is specialized for contraction when muscle cells, also called muscle fibers or myocytes, contract. They shorten and bring about some type of movement. There are 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. The movements that each can produce have very different purposes. Skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle may also be called striated muscle or voluntary muscle. Each name describes a particular aspect of this tissue. As you will see, the skeletal muscle cells are cylindrical, have several nuclei each, and appear striated or striped. The striations are the result of the precise arrangement of the contracting proteins within the cells. Skeletal muscle tissue makes up the muscles that are attached to bones. These muscles are supplied with motor nerves and thus move the skeleton. An important exception is the diaphragm, which does not move bones, but rather enlarges the thoracic cavity and brings about inhalation. Skeletal muscles also produce a significant amount of heat, which is important to help maintain the body's constant temperature. Each muscle cell has its own motor nerve ending. The nerve impulses that can then travel to the muscles are essential to cause contraction. Although we do not have to consciously plan all our movements, the nerve impulses for them originate in the cerebrum, the thinking part of the brain. Let us return to the three names for this tissue. Skeletal describes its location, striated describes its appearance, and voluntary describes how it functions. The skeletal muscles and their function are the subject of chapter 7. Smooth muscle. Smooth muscle may also be called involuntary muscle or visceral muscle. The cells of smooth muscle have tapered ends, a single nucleus, and no striations. Although nerve impulses do bring about contractions, this is not something most of us can control, hence the name involuntary. The term visceral refers to internal organs, many of which contain smooth muscles. The functions of smooth muscles are actually functions of the organs in which the muscles is found. In the stomach and intestine, smooth muscles contract in waves called peristalsis to propel food through the digestive tract. In the walls of arteries and veins, smooth muscle constricts to dilate or dilates the vessels to maintain normal blood pressure. The iris of the eye has two sets of smooth muscle fibers to constrict or dilate the pupil, which regulates the amount of light that strikes the retina. Other functions of smooth muscle are mentioned later in chapters. This is an important tissue that you will come across again and again in our study of the human body. Cardiac muscle. The cells of the heart, cardiac muscle, are shown in figure 4.6. They are branched, have one nucleus each, and have faint striations. The cell membranes at the end of these cells are extensively folded and fit into matching folds of the membranes of the next cells. These interlocking folds are called intercalculated discs and permits the electrical impulses of muscle contractions to pass swiftly from cell to cell. This enables the heart to beat in a very precise wave of contraction from the upper chambers to the lower chambers. Cardiac muscle as a whole is called the myocardium and forms the wall of the atria and ventricles, the four chambers of the heart. Its function, therefore, is the function of the heart to pump blood. The contractions of the myocardium create blood pressure and keep blood circulating throughout the body so that the blood can carry out its many functions. Cardiac muscle cells have the ability to contract by themselves. Thus, the heart maintains its own beat. The role of nerve impulses is to increase or decrease the heart rate, depending on whatever is needed by the body in a particular situation. We will return to the heart in more detail in chapter 12. Takeaways. Takeaways 3. 1. What physical ability do all three types of muscle tissue have, and what general function does this give them? 2. Which type of muscle cells must receive nerve impulses in order to contract? 3. For the next 10 minutes, in parentheses, back in those strange circumstances, close parentheses, you are permitted only one functioning voluntary muscle. Which one do you want and why? Nerve tissue. Nerve tissue consists of nerve cells called neurons and some specialized cells found only in nervous system. The nervous system has two divisions: the central nervous system, CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, PNS. The brain and the spinal cord are the organs of the CNS. They are made of neurons and specialized cells called neuroglia. The CNS and the neuroglia are discussed in detail in chapter 8. The PNS consists of all of the nerves that emerge from the CNS and supply the rest of the body. These nerves are made of neurons and specialized cells called Schwann cells. The Schwann cells form the myelin sheath. Myelin is a phospholipid. to electronically insulate neurons. Neurons are capable of generating and transmitting electrical mechanical impulses. There are many different kinds of neurons, but they all have the same basic structure. The cell body contains the nucleus and is essential for the continuing life of the neuron. An axon is a process. The term process here means something that sticks out, a cellular extension that carries electrical impulses away from the cell body. A neuron has only one axon. Dendrites are processes that carry impulses toward the cell body. A neuron may have several or even many dendrites. An electrical nerve impulse travels along the cell membrane of a neuron where neurons meet. However, there is a small space called a synapse, which any electrical impulse cannot cross. At a synapse between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite or cell body of the next neuron, impulse transmission depends on chemicals called neurotransmitters. A summary of nerve tissue is found in Table 44. Nerve tissue makes up the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. The nervous system is one of the control systems of the body, and each organ of the system has very specific functions. These aspects of the nervous system are covered in more detail in Chapter 8. For now, we will mention only the categories of the functions of nerve tissue. These include feeling and interpreting sensation, the initiation of movement, the rapid regulation of body functions such as heart rate and breathing, and the organization of information for learning and memory. Takeaways 4. 1. Why is the cell membrane of a neuron of particular importance? 2. State the function of a neuron axon. 3. What does synaptic transmission between neurons require? Membranes. Membranes are sheets of tissues that cover or line surfaces or that separate organs or parts, in parentheses, lobes, close parentheses, of organs from one another. Many membranes produce secretions that have specific functions. The two major categories of membranes are epithelial membranes and connective tissue membranes. Epithelial membranes. There are two types of epithelial membranes, serous and mucous. Each type is found in specific locations within the body and secretes a fluid. These fluids are called serous fluid and mucus. Serous membranes. Serous membranes are sheets of simple squamous epithelium that line some closed body cavities and cover the organs in these cavities. The pleural membranes are the serous membranes of the thoracic cavity. The parietal pleural lines the chest wall, and the visceral pleural covers the lungs. Notice that line means on the inside and covers means on the outside. These terms cannot be used interchangeably because each indicates a different location, close parentheses. The pleural membrane secretes serous fluid, which prevents friction between them as the lungs expand and recoil during breathing. The heart in the thoracic cavity between the lungs has its own set of serous membranes. The parietal pericardium lines the fibrous pericardium, in parentheses, a connective tissue membrane, close parentheses. And the visceral pericardium or epicardium is on the surface of the heart muscle. Serous fluid is produced to prevent friction as the heart beats. In the abdominal cavity, the peritoneum is the serous membrane that lines the cavity. The mesentery or visceral peritoneum is folded over and covers the abdominal organs. Here, the serous fluid prevents friction as the stomach and intestines contract and slide against other organs. Mucous membranes. Mucous membranes line the body tracts, in parentheses, systems, close parentheses, that have openings to the environment. These are the respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive tracts. The epithelium of mucous membrane, mucosa, varies with the different organs involved. The mucosa of the esophagus and of the vagina is stratified squamous epithelium. The mucosa of the trachea is ciliated epithelium, and the mucosa of the stomach is columnar epithelium. The mucus secreted by these membranes keeps the lining epithelial cell wet. Remember that these are living cells, so if they dry out, they will die. If the digestive tract, mucus also lubricates the surface to permit the smooth passage of food. In the respiratory tract, the mucus traps dust and bacteria, which are then swept to the pharynx by ciliated epithelium. Connective tissue membranes. Many membranes are made of connective tissue. You may recall that meninges were mentioned in chapter 1. The meninges line the cranial and spinal cavities and cover the brain and spinal cord. Again, notice that line and cover have very precise meanings. The connective tissue membranes will be discussed with the organ system of which they are a part. So for now, their locations and functions are summarized in table 4-5. Takeaways 5. What is the difference in the location of serous and mucous membranes? 2. Describe the location of the cranial meninges with respect to the skull and to the brain. Aging and tissues. As mentioned in the previous chapter, aging takes place at the cellular level, but it is, of course, apparent in the groups of cells we call tissues. In muscle tissue, for example, the proteins that bring about contraction deteriorate and are not repaired or replaced. The same is true of collagen and elastin. The proteins of connective tissue, such as the dermis of the skin. Other aspects of the aging of tissues will be more meaningful to you in the context of the functions of organs and systems. So we will save those for the following chapter. Summary. The tissues and membranes described in this chapter are more complex than the individual cells of which they are made. We have reached only an intermediate level. However, with respect to the structural and functional complexity of the body as a whole, the following chapters are concerned with the organ systems, the most complex level. In the description of the organs of these systems, you will find mentions of their tissues and their contributions to each organ and the organ system.